Ringing Tone by John Christopher. He was a quiet, ordinary man of about 50, his voice educated and well modulated, his blue-grey suit of good cloth and cut, his manner pleasant, at times almost apologetic. He had put up at a small country hotel in the north of England and had one drink in the bar before dinner, and was now sitting in the lounge over his coffee. The manageress of the hotel thought he might have been a military man. His carriage was erect, and his small moustache neatly clipped. But if so, he did not use his title. He registered simply as J.F. Hall, nationality British, home address, The Pines, Burdock, Devon. He had booked for one night only, and asked for an early breakfast the next morning. She wondered briefly if he were married. He did not have a married look. She saw him as a bachelor, or perhaps a widower, returning to a small house in the country. She glanced in on him as she passed the lounge. He had taken the local telephone directory from its place in the hall, and was leafing through it. A traveller, looking for possible contacts. The manageress nodded to herself, and moved on. Had she stayed, she would have seen him browse on through the directory, and note down half a dozen other numbers, but not, although she was right about him being a traveller, the numbers of commercial firms. Each number had a girl's or woman's name beside it. She had been right about his background too. Burdock was a village south of Exeter. The Pines, a small cottage on its outskirts. A simple country place where he was known and liked. It was about 7 o'clock on a still bright summer evening. He put the car away in the garage behind the cottage, and carried his bag and his briefcase to the house. Inside he found a note from Mrs. Williams, his daily help. It told him that she had picked both broad beans and raspberries, and they were in bowls in the fridge. He unpacked, putting his dirty clothes in the laundry basket for Mrs. Williams to take away next day. He moved about the house, seeing that everything was in order and properly dusted. Then he went down to the kitchen and made supper for himself. Mrs. Williams had left him a piece of rump steak, and washed and scraped new potatoes. He grilled the steak, boiled the potatoes lightly with a little mint, cooked some of the broad beans from his garden, and tossed them in melted butter. He worked well and deftly, leaving no mess. He did not eat in the kitchen, but took things through to his small but nicely furnished dining room, with watercolours of the Middle East round the walls. He brought a bottle of beer from the fridge too, and drank it out of a silver tankard with an inscription on one side. The inscription ran, Captain J.F. Hall, 42nd Lancers, middleweight boxing champion, 1939. He had raspberries and cream after the steak, and put a kettle on for coffee, while he washed and dried the plates and pots. He took the coffee with him into his parlour. There was a radio and a television set, but he did not switch either of them on. There was also a case on the wall, full of books, but he did not take one out. He stirred his coffee, relaxed and contemplating pleasure. When he had sipped it, and found it still too hot, he took his diary out of his pocket and went through it. There were several pages covered with his meticulous handwriting, more than 50 names and numbers culled from directories ranging from Newcastle to Bristol. The first was Jennifer Gillett. He sipped his coffee again and pulled the telephone towards him. Picking up the handpiece, he dialed the number. At the end there was a brief silence, and then, with the familiar lift of excitement, he heard it ringing out. His mouth dried as he waited, and he was forced to swallow. A click, and a voice said, "Hello? Is that Miss Gillett?" Yes, it is. Who's that?" A young warm voice, no older than late 20s, with a touch of the north in the vowels, self-possessed, though. A secretary, perhaps. He said, "Jennifer, are you listening carefully?" "Who is that? Listen." He began to talk in his quiet, well-modulated voice, at first only touching on the outrageous, more innuendo than anything else. A careful, slow assault on modesty. She allowed him to go on for quite a long time before she broke in. "Who are you? You're disgusting." Then the obscenities began to flow, slowly at first, spaced out, but more torrentially as excitement quickened. When she interrupted, he allowed her to do so, relishing her shock and nausea. It was quite a good one, several minutes before she hung up. He put down his own telephone and sat back. Gradually his pulse subsided. Against the name in the diary he put a small tick. He made 3 other contacts that evening. The first hung up on him very quickly. The third listened readily. He sensed rather than heard the other person in the room, the hand over the receiver, the quick instruction to go next door and telephone the police. He hung up and sat back, wiping his brow. Besides, he had the memory of the second one to dwell on. The best of the evening, a soft-voiced girl whose genuine horror and disgust were tinctured with fascination, innocence surrendering itself to be corrupted. Against her name he put a cross. He would come back to her. He was, as always after the calls, tired, drained of energy, but relaxed. He made himself a cup of hot milk. The following evening he was asked out to supper by a couple, a retired bank manager and his wife, who lived in the next village, and who seemed to like his company. They were nice people, but depressingly concerned with social distinctions. He had a notion that a lot of their interest in him was due to his accent and his old school tie. He found this pitiable, but tolerated them, and although he quite enjoyed preparing his own meals, it made a pleasant change not to have to do so. The evening after that, he walked into the village, had a couple of pints, in halves, at the Spread Eagle, and came back to eat bread and cheese and watch television. It was during the next day that he felt the restlessness beginning to stir in him. A couple of times he went into the parlour for no particular purpose, and found himself gazing at the telephone where it sat, black and anonymous. The feeling had returned earlier than usual. His need, the tension building up, to be followed by the release, came at intervals that varied between a fortnight and 6 weeks, averaging rather less than a month. But he understood a lot about himself, and could find a reason for its swift return this time. That last call had been a mistake. He should have ended on the soft-voiced girl, on the delicious note of half-response. The one after that, the woman who had tried to keep him on the line so as to trap him, had unsettled him. He made himself China tea at 4 o'clock, and nibbled a chocolate biscuit while he drank it. He stared at the telephone, but did not lift it. He did not make calls until the cheap period. Sunday morning, perhaps. He had never done that. They would be lying in bed, some of them, drowsy and vulnerable. It was a tempting speculation, but he did not pursue it. Sunday morning was wrong. On Sunday morning he went to church, as he had done since he was a boy. Just before 6 he switched on the television for the news. Words and pictures washed meaninglessly across his mind. The news began at 5 minutes to the hour. At 6 o'clock he felt for the diary in his pocket and then, with his unhurried military gait, walked across the room to turn the television off. There was silence, with no sound except birds outside. Silence and the telephone. He drew 3 blanks in succession, and the 4th hung up on him before he had the chance to say more than a word or two. He did not dial the next number on his list, but put on his jacket and walked down to the village. He had a few half-pints at the Spread Eagle. He knew all the people in the bar, and 1 or 2 of them spoke to him, but the tension was still in him. He heard, like a whisper of delight, the thin clamour of imagined voices. He refused the offer of another drink, thanking the man politely, and set off for home. He got through right away. It was as though she had been standing by the telephone, waiting for him. "Miss Spaulding?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "speaking." The voice was slightly breathless, young. He began to talk, weaving his way forward into the suburbs of pleasure. She did not interrupt him. When he paused, she said, "Go on." It happened sometimes, though rarely, that he chanced on a woman whose need matched his own. Those occasions, when they occurred, were exquisitely enjoyable, though he felt unhappy afterwards and never telephoned them again. But this one was not like that. There was a strangeness in her voice, but it was not sensual response. She said, "Go on, talk to me." He tried, and thought he was succeeding, but the situation confused and disturbed him. He broke off again, and she said, swiftly, "Don't stop. Say anything. Anything you like. I don't mind. But please don't stop talking." It had gone wrong. There was nothing he could say, and the sensible thing was to put the telephone down, to try another. But he was held by what he had recognized in her voice. It was desperation. She said, "I have to talk to someone. I don't mind. Anything. I have to. Listen, do you want to know about me? I'm 21, but people say I look even younger. Men say. And pretty. They say that too. And sexy. You want to talk about that, don't you? I'll listen. I promise." He did not speak. "I'm dark," she said, "and I have a good figure. 36 bust, 36 hips, 24 waist. But I can pull it in even smaller. Do you want to know what I'm wearing? Well, practically nothing. Just a housecoat and slippers and scent. It's called femme, and that means woman. I've been told it's very seductive. I've been told." He heard her draw breath. "Do you want more? Do you want to talk about my love life? I'm not a virgin. Does that matter? There were 2 or 3 unimportant ones, and then one more serious. Do you want to know about him? I don't mind telling you. His name was Tony Phillips. He used to make love to me. Do you want to know the details? Where and when? How many times? I don't care. Honestly, I just want to believe that the world isn't all emptiness, that there is someone there, anyone." He said, "I don't think—" "Don't go. Please don't go. It's such an old story, a tale out of a cheap fiction magazine. I can't help wondering, am I a cheap fiction character myself? Is everyone? No, you're not, are you? You're real. You have to be. But you see, he was married, and he and his wife didn't get on, and he was going to leave her, get a divorce and marry me. You've read about that, haven't you? And seen it on films and television. So perhaps it didn't happen at all. Perhaps it was just something I read or saw and dreamed about, a bad dream. People don't die of bad dreams." He moved slowly to put the receiver down, hearing her voice get smaller, more tinny, as the handpiece approached its rest. But, as though she sensed what was happening, he heard her cry, "Please, please stay," and almost unwillingly brought it back. "You're there, aren't you?" she said. "You are there." He said, "Yes, I'm here." "You know what happens, don't you? The girl finds she's going to have a baby, and is happy at first, because she wants that. She wants his child. His wife is bound to divorce him, isn't she? But then the girl realizes he isn't happy. He's worried. It could cause a scandal, and would hurt him in his job. And there's a daughter he already has. She's away at school, and he hasn't talked about her much, and the girl hasn't realized how much he loves her, and it would hurt her too, you see. He doesn't say anything, not at first, but it's enough that she can tell he's worried. And so, instead of loving the thing that's grown inside her, she begins to hate it, for his sake, because it might hurt him. In the end, it's she who talks about abortion. He looks so much happier when she does. He says she's not to worry. He'll find out everything, pay for everything. And it isn't like a person when you don't see it. And there will be time to have children, later, when things can be done tidily, properly, with no scandal and no fuss. She paused, and he thought she might be going to weep, but she went on. He did all he said. He found the place and he paid the bill, and he came in to see me. He brought me flowers and liqueur chocolates, and he'd forgotten that I don't like cherries, but you can't remember everything, can you? And probably he was preoccupied, thinking about the note he was going to write to me, how to put it tactfully. He didn't send the note until I came out of the nursing home place. It was very well written. He put it very well, that a crisis like this makes one realise things, that an affair like this wasn't right for me, but that he had been living in a fool's paradise and thinking it could ever be any different. Because Helen, that's his wife, Helen, would never let him go. And Jane, that's his daughter, the next few years were vital for her. She was taking her O-levels. So it wasn't fair to me, and therefore it had to end so that I wouldn't be hurt any more than I had been. It was thoughtful of him, wasn't it? He did not answer. She said, "That was yesterday. I wrote back to him. I begged him to come and see me today, at least telephone me if he could not manage that. I told him I would wait in. And then this morning I thought that they might have gone away for the weekend, so I telephoned his house. His wife answered, Helen. I met her once, at one of the firm's parties. I didn't say anything, just held my hand over the telephone, and I heard her call to him, "Tony, there's someone here but they're not answering." And him saying very far off, "It's probably only a joke, hang up." I've been sitting here since then, waiting for him to come, or to ring me. It's a funny thing, I used to be afraid of heights, but today I'm not. I've always avoided looking out of windows, but today I've kept going back to them. Everything below looks so small, so unimportant. As he is, as I am. I told myself I would give him till 6 o'clock to ring, and then I gave him another hour, and another. And at last I gave him half an hour, and my mind was quite made up, and I was glad about it. And then, on the very last minute of the half hour, the telephone rang, and I picked it up. It was you. He said, "I'm sorry." Don't be sorry, talk to me. Or listen. I don't mind what we talk about, because everything's so small and far away. And I've left the window open, and I think I am a little frightened, but there's nothing else that makes sense, because I can't live like this. Don't you see? There has to be someone else, apart from myself. Do you want to know what happened the last time we were together? I made a meal for him, a risotto because he liked risotto, and he brought a bottle of Chianti, and afterwards we put the record player on, and we... With a sudden movement he hammered the receiver down. There was a metallic clang. Dusk was fallen. The air was calm and warm, and the scent of stocks and roses came through the open window. He often walked in the garden after telephoning. It gave him reassurance, and a kind of peace. But tonight, peace evaded him. His mind was prey to another's agony. He attempted to dismiss it. An hysterical girl, no more than that. The world was full of them. It did not concern him. None of those he had telephoned concerned him. They were not people, but voices. She was alone and trapped, but who wasn't? There was nothing anyway that he could do for her. Early stars winked in the sky. The earth was rolling on eastwards into the night. He walked back into the house. For several moments he stood by the telephone, staring at it. Then he dialed her number. It rang, and went on ringing, with no reply.